I have a friend who grew up Roman Catholic, and when he came out as a young adult as a gay man, he realized he had a great excuse not to go back to church because he was not loved and accepted in the Roman Catholic Church he had grown up in. And so when he and his partner were introduced to an Episcopal priest, and that Episcopal priest said, "I would be honored to bless your marriage," that Episcopal priest also sat them down and said, "I hope you realize that you no longer have an excuse not to go to church." My friend is now the senior warden of his church. What is the love and abundance that God has shown to you that leaves you with no more excuse? That's one of the themes that I think unites our lectionary readings today. We've got our reading from the book of Joshua. The children of Israel come out of 40 long years in the wilderness where they've done almost nothing but complain against God and Moses and Aaron, and this manna that they've been eating off the ground for 40 years. And God says to Joshua, "Today, you will no longer eat the manna, you will eat the fruits of the ground of the promised land." No more excuse to complain. And then in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus tells this parable of the prodigal son, saying of this younger son, "Your father loves you. He's not going to punish you. You've got no more excuse to eat the food of pigs and complain about how much you dislike your dad." He says to the older son, "Everything I have is yours. You're going to inherit it all. You've got no more excuse to resent your brother." And Jesus tells this whole story to the scribes and Pharisees saying, "Guys, God's love and abundance are enough for everybody. No more excuses for ostracizing the tax collectors and the sinners among you." And then this passage from 2 Corinthians, does that not speak to us all? This is a new creation. This is a new moment. You are made new. They are made new. No more excuses for the grudges, for the little moments of vengeance that you have been living for the shame. No more excuse. God's abundance and love are enough for everyone. I will be leaving Birmingham tomorrow. I am going to the AAPI retreat, the Asian American Pacific Islander Episcopal Leadership Retreat. I went for the first time last year. We met in Portland. And you might be wondering, why is this an important retreat? It's important to me because being an Asian American Episcopalian can get a little bit lonely. I Googled how many of us there are, and it's like 1% of the Episcopal Church is AAPI. So it's easy to sometimes fall into this, nobody looks like me. Oh, nobody's got the same family story as me. Oh, we sing all this music written by English monks, and it has nothing to do with me. And I can also kind of wallow in some of this stuff. It's a character flaw. But it is important to go and share worship and share fellowship and share Asian snacks with people who do look like me and who do share some of my story. And I will say the snacks are amazing. And the other thing is you arrive at this retreat. I got there in Portland, and I realized, wow, everybody here can either play an instrument or do math really well, or some of them even know a martial art. And a few can do all three. Not me. But then there's all this moment for story sharing. And our facilitator last year actually opened up the room and said, we have a lot to lament together. Most of us have some kind of family heritage in Japan, in Korea, in Vietnam, in the Philippines. You've got a story of a family that was torn apart during a world war, during the Korean War, during the Vietnam War. Many of you have a story of having lost something through assimilation of that culture. Many of you cannot speak the language that your grandparents spoke, and that is a grief that you carry with you, and often for some kind of violent reason. And then there are the more contemporary things that we bring with us. Almost everybody in the room has a story of being told to go back to your own country. There's a bishop who tells a story of during the COVID years, he and his wife were attacked on the sidewalk because they had brought the China virus with them. He's from South Korea, but he had brought the China virus, apparently. There are stories of people who say, you know, I was passed over for a job in the church because I didn't look like an Episcopal priest, or because my accent was too strong. And so those kinds of stories are being told, and as they're told, and I'm living into some of my character flaws, you sort of start to get to a point where you're like, oh my God, like nobody understands me. In fact, maybe nobody loves me. In fact, maybe I don't belong here. I don't know, maybe I'm not Episcopalian at all. Maybe I'm not accepted. Maybe I don't belong. One thing that Asian Americans are not very good at is prolonged external displays of emotion. And so as we got to the end of 3 days last year, I was like, oh man, I'm going to have to go outside and take a breather. And I might just go back to the hotel and take a nap. And so I walked outside, and a friend of mine who's also half Japanese, Michael, was following me out. And we're walking across the courtyard, and Portland has a big homelessness problem. And the cathedral there has a very vibrant homeless ministry, and their soup kitchen was just letting out for the day. And as we were crossing across the courtyard, there were these guys, black and white, who were gathered there, and they just had lunch, and they were tossing around this Nerf ball football thing to each other. And one of them sees us as we're leaving, and he goes, "Ni hao, konnichiwa." Got to cover all the language bases. And I looked over and I realized, oh, they're talking to me and my friend Michael. And he threw me the football. So I threw it back. And this guy says, oh, well, if you want to play with us, you're going to have to put your backpack down. I was like, I don't want to play with you. I'm going to go take a nap. But I got sucked into this Nerf football game for the next 15 minutes. We're throwing this ball back and forth, and at one point I looked down and I realized it's only 3/4 of a Nerf ball. And I said, well, what happened to your ball? and he points at this fluffy dog who's lying on the grass sunbathing, and he says, oh, she took a bite out of it. And he says, her name is Kimiko. She's half Japanese and half Chow. I was like, we're half Japanese too. And so we threw the ball back and forth a little bit more, and finally the guy who was kind of the leader called for a water break, and they went over and got some water, and I went over to where my backpack was, and I got some water, and this guy reaches into his backpack, and he pulls out this half-eaten sleeve of ginger snaps that who knows how long they had been in there, I do not know. And he starts handing them out. And he came all the way to where I was getting my water under the tree and hands me this stale ginger snap, which I had no intention of eating, until I realized that ginger snap wasn't just a ginger snap. It was what we in the Episcopal Church would call a sacrament. It was communion. A sacrament, an outward and visible and tangible and tastable sign of an inward and unseen grace. An outward and visible and tastable sign of an internal message of love and abundance and belonging. And so I took a bite of the ginger snap, and it was stale. And I shoved the rest of it into my pocket and went back into the retreat, realizing that God had just told me, Katie, you have no more excuse for feeling unloved and for feeling like you don't belong. Because you do. And you were called over by someone who I appointed to help you understand that you do belong. And so no more excuses. And go and show that same love to the whole world and to this church that I have put you in. And so as we are journeying together through the rest of this season of Lent, I just offer you that question once more to chew on in your own life, in your own work, in your own faith. What is it that through God's abundance and love, you have no more excuse for? And for that love, and for that belonging, and for that abundance of grace and life, which takes away all our excuses, thanks be to God.